out of your hearing range. You can't hear anything. It's almost like total silence. This was what happened. The anemometer went right off the scale at about 86 knots. The ship was right over. Water was pouring in everywhere. The captain said, stand by to abandon ships. Get your life vests and get up here. So all the crew, of course, they put on their yellow life vests and came up on deck. And they were huddled between the mainmast and the funnel, waiting for the captain to give the word to abandon ship. All right, lads, I know you can handle this situation. What I want you to do now is swing those boats out. They had 2 lifeboats, but the ship was so far over and not coming back that they couldn't push the lifeboats on one side off the davits. It was too heavy. Only the other lifeboat was okay to swing out. All right, lads, cut them away. When you go over the side, at least they might float off. Now, I've got to do something here. So he goes into the bridge. Now remember, the ship's over at about 45 degrees, over there permanently. He switches on the radio transceiver and he calls. Sydney radio, Sydney radio, Sydney radio. This is Birchgrove Park, Birchgrove Park. Do you hear me? Over. Sydney radio, Birchgrove Park, calling Sydney radio. All you can hear is some Morse cutting in close by. No reply from Sydney radio, which was down at La Perouse. He thought to himself, why aren't they hearing me? They must be able to hear me. And then he thought, well, this is a high-frequency signal. Maybe it's skipping up over the ionosphere and going over the top of Sydney radio, and they can't hear me. But somebody somewhere will be able to hear me. So he makes the call, the general distress call. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Birchgrove Park, Birchgrove Park. Any station reading Birchgrove Park, please come in, over. Nothing, no reply. And then he realised they were finished. The ship was about to go down. Nobody knew their plight. Nobody could help them. Then he had an inspiration. He remembered that they had one last ace to play. The ship, fortunately, was tilted so that its port wing of the bridge was up, and that's where they kept the Aldous lamp. And the Aldous lamp was on battery supply. Already, Earl Olsen had gone down, swung all the switches so that there wouldn't be any electricity sparking when the ship actually went under. So the ship was in total darkness. He makes his way to the wing of the bridge. You can imagine the rain and the wind hitting him. He plugs in the Aldous lamp, switches on the battery supply, and you beauty, it's on, gleaming white light. He turns it around and he faces it to the south, and he starts sending a series of A's, trying to attract the attention of the signal station, which is 12 miles away to the south. Meanwhile, 12 miles away to the south, high up on Sydney's South Head, is the Maritime Services Board signal station. Now, I can recall visiting that place many years ago, and what a view they've got. They've got a glass front that goes around the side. Sydney's North Head bulks out here. They can see right up the coast. They can see right out 50 mile out to sea and right down towards the Illawarra. Beautiful view. 50 miles at least. That was on a clear day. This wasn't a clear day. This was night time. The windows were all misted up. There was rain and condensation all running down the inside and the outside of the window. And the fellow there, the signalman who was on duty all by himself, his name was Harold Gosling. And Harold Gosling had been an ex-Navy signalman and later took up the job with the Maritime Services Board. And one of his jobs was to check the arrival of the ships in and out of the harbour. There were certain ships due out that night. Only one was due in, the Birchgrove Park. And he's thinking to himself, the Birchgrove Park, she should be hoving into view by about now. And of course, the ship doesn't arrive. So suddenly he sees this light winking at him. He has a signal to send to the Birchgrove Park to tell them that when they come into Sydney Harbour, they've got to proceed under the harbour bridge, of course, and go up to Blackwattle Bay, where they usually unload. And he has to send this signal once he sees the ship. He sees this light winking, so he thinks to himself, will I put on the signal light behind the glass? No, I'll go outside. So he bangs open this screen door, goes out into the pouring rain, plugs his own Altus light, comes out, leans on the rail and sends a little letter, K. K, which means go ahead. Out of the darkness, the light starts winking back erratically, trying to send Morse code. Harold, who's pretty calm, he just sends QRS, which means please send slower. And then the signal comes back. If I was to convert that flashing light into a sound, it would have went like this. SOS, 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 DE, this is Birchgrove, and each time he sent a word, Harold would give a flick to say that he's got it in his mind. Birchgrove Park. The next word was WE, we. And then the light went out. And on 2:45 a.m, on the 8th of August 1956, the Birchgrove Park rolled and sank, throwing her 14-man crew into an icy cold sea. First over the side was Neil Stewart. He'd seen one of the boats get washed away. He dived into the darkness, total darkness. It was so dark, the sky was covered, no clouds, you couldn't see anything, just maybe the phosphorescent crest of a wave as the foam broke. He dived in and he grabbed something, and sure enough, his hands latched onto the gunwale of the lifeboat. He thought, you beauty. He pulled his leg over the side to get into the boat. And even as he was doing so, a great wave came out of the darkness. Boom! Half filled the lifeboat, just about tipping it over on him, and then throwing the oars into the sea. So he was in the lifeboat with no oars. All around him he could hear people screaming out to him, help me, you in the boat, someone got in a boat then, and all this sort of stuff. And he knew there was people very close by. He's out there, his hands searching around in the darkness, suddenly grabs someone by the hair, pulls him alongside, and it's Earl Olsen, the fireman who'd heroically gone down below to switch all off the electrics before the ship sank. Now, Earl Olsen was a pretty strong fellow, so was Neil Stewart. They get into the boat. They can hear another man close by. They all know each other intimately, of course, and this fellow's name was Charlie Camilleri. And Charlie Camilleri was about 42 years of age. He was a little fella about my size, and he was a hero. Why do I say he was a hero? Because he was the ship's cook. And I tell you what, when you're on a small ship and you're the ship's cook, you sure take some roasting. Now, Charlie Camilleri, it must have seemed very strange for him, because it must have been like a bad dream recurring, because only 5 years earlier, Charlie had been pulled into a lifeboat in the middle of the night by strong hands when his earlier ship, the Kiama, had gone down 6 miles off the entrance in 1951. I gave this speech to a Probus Club one time, and the ladies put a hand up and she said, I knew Charlie. We had him home for breakfast after the shipwreck. That was the earlier shipwreck. He didn't survive this one. Charlie, of course, being the ship's cook, I don't know whether any of you are familiar with what they call the galley on a ship, but it's really the kitchen, right? Now, the kitchen on a small ship would be about from where I'm standing to that wall, maybe across to there, across like that. Very small, and in it, it would have a huge stove. The stove would be at least as big as one of these tables. And the stove would be fed with furnace fuel oil. That's what they use for the power. and it got red hot. So the whole room was hot. So when you worked in a galley, you worked with minimum clothes. And Charlie, knowing that the ship was in trouble, knowing that the crew might have to abandon, had gone in, the range was already hot, and he'd gone in just wearing his singlet, his shorts and his sandals to make the boys a cup of coffee before they went over the side. So he went over the side clad like that. He was pulled into the lifeboat, but he didn't last. By 6 o'clock in the morning, he'd shivered to death on the bottom boards of the boat. And the boat, of course, without oars, was drifting. In the meantime, all the other fellows were in the water, all okay at this stage. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I spent about 25 years as a radio operator in various organisations. And in all that time, I only received two distress calls, and they were from aircraft, actually, up in New Guinea. To receive a distress call puts a tremendous responsibility on you, because you know that these people are relying on you for their lives on the action you take. Well, Harold Gosling, he'd taken the SOS, it had stopped. He probably had in those days one of those old-fashioned telephones where you wind the handle with a direct line to the captain of port somewhere in Sydney. He'd have grabbed it and went, "Captain of port, sir?" "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir." "Southend Signal Station, sir." "The Birchgrove Park. She said a distress call, sir." "Yes." No, she's not responding anymore. I think she's gone down, sir." "What's that?" And then he was asked a question, a key question. "Where do you think the ship sank?" On the basis of that, they would launch the search and rescue. But all Harold had was a light out in the darkness with no points of reference. He couldn't see any horizons. He couldn't see anything except the light in the darkness. So his logic told him, "Sir, I think she's gone down off Long Reef," because Long Reef is notorious for ships being wrecked. And so on the strength of that, they launched the rescue at Long Reef. Now, put yourself in this scene. I know that my friend Jeff Scott here has got a boat. He goes outside the harbour, a bit of fishing. If Jeff went out now and he made a call on his mobile radio that there's something wrong, the boat was taking water or something like that, somebody would spring into action somewhere. Or he would make up, if he had a radio, I don't think he's got a radio, but if he did have, he'd make a radio call, or he'd fire a flare or do something. And you know what? Within minutes, they'd have to put an extra air traffic controller up in Sydney Airport to keep the helicopters separated from one another. Because what would happen is the police would send their helicopter, Channel 7 would send theirs, Channel 9 would send theirs. You'll probably find the Wales Bank would get in the action too, and even the NRMA. They'd all want to be in there to see what's going on because of the story. But in 1956, it wasn't like that. In 1956, they had a search and rescue organisation. No helicopters to scramble. But on this particular day or night, something went dreadfully wrong. The captain of port got the message and he said, no, the Maritime Services Board's area of responsibility is Sydney Harbour and the rivers and so forth, so it's not our job. Better get on to the police. So, having worked at the police in Campbell Street in those days, I know what would have happened. The senior operator, which would have been an old sergeant, would say, no, that's not ours, mate. We can't go outside the 3 mile limit. No, that's not our jurisdiction. And so the call then was, oh, better get on to the Navy. But there's no one up at this time of night. Oh, well, what about, So the phone calls just kept going around. Nobody would say, I'll take charge. Nobody. The phones were ringing all over the place. And the phone rang in the downtown offices of R.W. Miller. Now you can imagine, 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone phone's ringing, the building's deserted, except for one man, the old night watchman. He's sitting there with his hands, trying to warm his hands around his thermos flask of coffee. He hears the bell, he hears the phone ringing. Ring, 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 ring. As I said, in those days, the phone didn't ring 6 times and then cut out with a recorded message. It would ring for 6 months. You put it in the cupboard, it was still ringing. So the phone was ringing somewhere in the building. So he gets out his big bunch. He's probably got a big old army coat on, you know, and a balaclava helmet to keep warm. Reaches down, gets his great big bunch of keys, walks along the corridor. No, it's not that one. Not that one. Oh, it looks like the boss's office. He goes into the boss's office, opens the door, goes in, and sure enough, the phone is ringing on the big desk of Mr. Rodney Miller, who owns R.W. Miller. Well, you can imagine, he's pretty timid. He's a very junior, you know, he's a night watchman after all, just a casual maybe. He picks up the phone, he says, hello, hello. Yes, this is R.W. Miller. What's that? One of our ships, the Birch Grove Park, sunk. Oh, I better do something. Now, remember the old Bakelite teledexers they used to have? One of those was on the desk. He slides it along and he puts it to H, hoping that it'll say home, and sure enough, he presses the button, springs up, and there's the home number, the private number. One of those silent numbers. In those days, only very important people had silent numbers. And he rings the number. Well, far away, I don't know where he lived somewhere, but somewhere down Vaucluse way, in his big king-size bed, fast asleep, the phone rings. Ring, 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 ring. Now, he would have had a white telephone, you know, because in those days, if you were very important, you had a white telephone. Nobody else had them. And of course, if you were the Prime Minister of the country or cruise chef or someone, you had a red phone. But big business had a white phone. So he would have put that to his ear and he said, what's that? It's you, Fred, is it? What do you ring about? I'll have your job for the... What? Birch Grove Park? Oh, okay. Thanks, Freddie. Thank you. Bye. Click. Now, Roderick Miller was a brilliant businessman. He knew not only all about his own business, he knew all about his opposition's business. And he knew that right at this moment, there was a collier called the William MacArthur, outbound, and it would be clearing the heads in the next 10 minutes or so, and then it would head down to Melbourne. All right, he said, put me through to Southhead Signal Station. So they put him through to Southhead Signal Station where he talks to Harold. Harold, he says, signal this ship going south and get them to search for our lads. And this is what happens. The ship, the Willie Mac as they called it, the William MacArthur, when it got to the heads, instead of turning south to Melbourne, turned north, heading up towards Long Reef. Now, an academic question for some of you historians. I don't expect an overwhelming show of hands here. There was a beautiful clipper-bowed ship, was black, had a tall funnel, was named after one of our early governors. It was the pilot ship. Anyone know the name of it? The pilot ship. They used to take the pilots onto the ships coming into Sydney Harbour. Come on. The Captain Cook, of course, the Captain Cook. Now the Captain Cook, because Harold, she was a pilot ship, always had a head of steam up ready to put to sea. And it put to sea it cleared the heads only 10 minutes behind the William MacArthur. So they turned to the north. Now, all this had taken place, and it was about 3:20 in the morning, and then they start to get up towards the search area. And the men are still alive, and they're yelling out, help me, help me, help me, help me. And of course, on board those ships, you can imagine the enormous seas, it's total blackness, the rain is pouring down, the wind is blowing, there's phosphorescent foam across the water. And they're searching with their searchlights. This way, scudding this way, scudding that way, backwards and forwards. See something? No. They're looking for the heads and shoulders of men in the water and the reflection on the yellow life vests. But they don't see any. And the reason they don't see any is the men are 6 miles further north. And so the search went on all through the night. That morning, when it became light, they'd already contacted the Navy. There was a message went over to the ABC for various people to rejoin their ships. Most of the ships were at sea, out on some big exercise, you know, the carrier and the destroyers and frigates. But there were some little ships left in there. One of them was the Kookaburra. I wasn't on it at that time. I joined it a few months later. The Kookaburra cleared the heads at 9 o'clock in the morning, followed by a minesweeper called HMAS Wagga. The only other vessels they could get was a British submarine called the Thorough. Can you imagine going out to look in a storm for someone in a submarine? But they went out. And the fourth ship was the police launch Nemesis. They turned to the north. At 9:30, they scrambled 2 long-range Neptune bombers from Richmond Air Force Base. And you can imagine, they crossed the coast somewhere around Palm Beach, maybe a bit further to the south, and they're looking. Sydney Tower, Papa November Papa, we're descending to 300, repeat 300 feet above the cliffs and proceeding south. And of course they loaded up with observers, people looking. They looked down and they could see these massive great rollers crashing in and sending spray up, bits of beach being ripped away by the huge seas, but they don't see any wreckage. They see nothing. They're proceeding south, and one of them looks over his shoulder right out, and they see, floating about 5 miles east of Barrenjoey, scores of pieces of wreckage floating in the water. Only then did the planes bang, and then they come to